The almighty dollar, the currency in which we allegedly say in which we trust. It's now at all-time highs against several currencies across the world. African countries, however, are certainly not celebrating the bifurcation of monetary policy between the expansionary policies on the ECB and, of course, in Asia, and what the Fed is about to do doesn't make matters any better. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenya capital, Nairobi. This is Global Business Africa. Thank you for joining us. Here's what's coming up in the next half hour. A diplomatic rouse in the offing as Tanzania limits Kenya's access to its airspace. We'll also be looking at Somalia's rising resistance to Western oil explorers. Right, let's start with the American dollar. It's fairly strong against pretty much all the world's currencies right about now. The greenback is at a 12-year high, for example, against a basket of global currencies, mainly due to U.S. economic growth exceeding expectations and the idea that the Fed will sooner rather than later have to raise rates. Now, that coupled with the increasing possibility of that rate hike sometime from June onwards is making things fairly difficult. The rise in the value of the currency has driven a series of central banks around the world to then adopt policies of quantitative easing, which effectively devalue their currencies. The European Union's euro, the Japanese yen, Nigeria's naira, these are just some of the currencies that have so far lost out significantly to the world's major reserve currency. Since the 22nd of December 2014, major foreign currencies have declined by an average of about 4.5% against the greenback. Now, let's look at Senegal. It's one of West Africa's most stable democracies. Average growth rates over there have been around 4%. And President Macky Sall aims to at least double that over the next decade. As Jen Keo explains, however, Senegalese authorities see an increasingly stronger dollar as a risk factor that could undermine economic gains made so far.
Senegalese President Macky Sall says the strong US dollar is posing a risk to the West African country's economy, which has already been hit by a drop in tourist numbers because of the Ebola outbreak. The dollar's recent strength is pushing up prices of consumer goods and has cancelled out the benefits of the drop in global oil price.
In general, our economies are still dependent on the West. We import more than we export, and it's done in dollars. One of the most important products that we import is oil. And for countries like Senegal, the low oil price has boosted the dollar, which limits imports for our economies.
Sall noted that the current trade imbalance highlights the need for countries in West Africa to move up the value chain to produce higher quality goods and not just rely on exporting raw materials. Senegal had to pay an extra 127,440 on a coupon payment for its 2024 Eurobond earlier this month due to the strong dollar.
La fièvre Ebola a causé d'importantes
The Ebola outbreak has had negative consequences on African economies, especially those countries that were directly affected by it. It affected their economies, healthcare systems, and also hit neighboring countries like ours. Although we only had one case of Ebola which we managed to treat, we felt the consequences, especially in tourism. We are assessing the consequences of the Ebola outbreak, and we will see how we can help the tourism sector.
Nous sommes en train d'évaluer ses conséquences et des mesures sont en cours.
Senegal, which has never suffered a coup, is considered as one of West Africa's most stable democracies. It emerged as a key regional hub in the decade after Cote d'Ivoire's conflict erupted in 2002, though some investors are now eyeing a return there to take advantage of Abidjan's post-conflict revival. The Senegalese president says his government is looking at ways of reviving tourism, even with concerns of the Ebola outbreak continue to ease. Macky Sall has promised a 10-year tax break for any new investments in the sector and is also looking at ways to slash the price of airfares by cutting taxes. Jane Keo, CCTV.
Elsewhere, Zambia's kwacha was down 1.35% to about 7.53 against the dollar on the 18th of March. That is its weakest level ever against the greenback. Now, this latest slump only adds to the currency's 13% decline against the American dollar since January this year. That decline is partly driven by the nosedive in the price of copper. Why does that matter? Zambia's main export is copper, and of course the strengthening of the American dollar well ahead of the widely expected rate hikes by the US Federal Reserve have essentially pounded that currency from two sides. A dispute over taxes between the government and international mining firms has also contributed to the drop in market confidence in Zambia's economy. News of plans by the government to relax rules that had prevented the payout of about $600 million in tax refunds to foreign mining companies had helped to boost the kwacha, making it recover briefly late last month. Since then, however, the currency has weakened because the dispute is so far yet to be resolved. Over in Uganda, the local currency, the Ugandan shilling, gained on Wednesday after banks sold dollars seeking a local currency that was essentially in tight supply. Now, traders said the demand for the US currency had virtually dried up after a series of dollar sales by the central bank to support the Ugandan shilling. The Ugandan shilling has pulled back from a run of steep losses last week, which saw it hit a new all-time low of 3,166, 3,126 buying and selling, respectively. Right, let's move away from dollar-related carnage onto something of a different flavor. A diplomatic row is looming between two East African countries after Tanzania imposed restrictions on the number of Kenyan flights that can get access to its airspace. Tanzania's Civil Aviation Authority has cut the frequency of flights from Kenya by over 60%, effectively setting the stage for another round of diplomatic and trade disputes between these two countries. Flights from Nairobi to Dar es Salaam have been reduced from 42 every week to just 14. And that's a decision that will have a direct and fairly adverse impact on both tourism and trade between the two parties. Tanzania's Civil Aviation Authority has also cancelled all previously scheduled flights by Kenya Airways, pending a revised flight schedule. So far, Kenya's government is yet to comment on this matter. Now, let's revisit a story that we focused on a little earlier in the week. Civil society in Somalia, under the umbrella of the Somalia South Central non-state actors, are opposed to all exploration by Western oil firms in the country. Now, they were joined in the protest by students on Tuesday, specifically calling for Italy and associated firms like Eni to leave Somalia. These firms have been undertaking seismic surveys for both onshore and offshore oil exploration, but the protesters describe their actions as illegal. Eni was authorized by the Somali government to assess the potential of hydrocarbon deposits offshore. Let's get you some more details on this particular story. Mohammed Hirmoge joins us now from the Somali seaside capital of Mogadishu with more details on this story. Hirmoge, let's start with some background here. Somalia's government spent the better part of the second half of last year asking international oil firms to resume oil exploration in the country. Are these latest protests, therefore, a concern for the government?
Rama, good to have you back. Well, Somalia is believed to have huge potential in oil and gas deposits, perhaps as much as 110 billion barrels. And it's also true that the Somali government has been asking multinational, international companies to come over and do oil exploration. But what these civil society protesters are specific about is the presence of Eni, the multinational company based in Rome. It's an Italian multinational oil and gas company, which they believe has been doing illegal exploration. Now, speaking to officers, the chairman and the leaders of the umbrella body of the civil society called Soshensa Somali Southern Central Non-State Actors, they say Eni does not apparently have any licensing to undertake whether it is seismic survey or exploration, extraction, or anything to do with oil and gas in this country. And therefore, they are calling on Eni and the Italian government to act quickly and leave Somalia's resources.
Now, oil exploration in Somalia, of course, is plagued by a pair of disputes. There's one with Kenya over the maritime border, and then there's another one over jurisdiction between the federal government and the authorities in places like Puntland and Somaliland. What's the status of those two disputes?
Well, as you mentioned, this problem is twofold. One is the maritime dispute with Kenya. Somalia's maritime dispute with Kenya. We understand talks between Mogadishu and Nairobi had failed. Once, then twice it failed. And Somalia actually took the option of taking its case to the UN's International Court of Arbitration, the International Court of Justice, if you may. And that rests there. But let's address the second elephant, which is the elephant in the room, a bigger one actually, more than the maritime dispute between Kenya and Somalia. Here we have three actors. Here we have the central government of Somalia, then we have the regional administrations, then we have the semi-autonomous regions and the breakaway region of Somaliland. And now, Somalia apparently doesn't have a clear and concise and ambiguous law that clearly defines who should license, who should trade in oil exploration on behalf of the larger Somalia. And therefore, what we have been seeing is that Puntland offers its own contract. It goes into negotiations and enters its own contract with oil exploration companies. The central government has been doing so without the approval of Puntland, or Puntland without having approval of the mainland Somalia. Somaliland is an entity of its own as well. It's a breakaway region, and it has been entering its own concession deals with multinational companies, and that is what has not been sorted out. We understand there's a bill which the Ministry of Petroleum is working on that clearly states, which is ambiguous, and states, that states that who should have the mandate to trade on behalf, to transact on behalf of the Somali government. And now, seemingly, there's a bit of confusion here and there, and that's something which the Somali government, specifically Parliament, is waiting to debate on and probably bring out some light into it.
Indeed. Final question to you, Hirmoge. Despite all the complex issues that you've laid out for us there, late last year, the government was essentially seeking to restart talks with Shell and ExxonMobil, companies that had production sharing contracts way back in the 80s before the Civil War started, to resume exploration in the blocks that they had. Has any progress been made on that front?
Well, the government of Somalia didn't make the details of that talks quite public, but speaking to sources in the Ministry of Petroleum, we were told that indeed ministry officials met with those companies that you're saying in Addis, and they have already started preliminary talks. But the ministry is also saying that soon they will declassify that information. They will bring the public up to speed on what they have been up to with regards to signing those deals and contracts with those two companies. At the moment, the ministry is saying anything else, apart from what the ministry is going to say, will remain speculations, largely speculations on what they did and what they talked about. But in about a week or two, we are assured that the ministry will lay out its plans with regards to deals that they have entered with those companies.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being. Fascinating story all the same. That's Mohammed Hirmoge live in the Somali capital of Mogadishu. Now, let's take it to the other side of the continent. After years of conflict, Cote d'Ivoire is emerging as yet again another giant in West Africa. Within 2 years, the country has made quite a bit of structural changes, all of which have improved the process of doing business in the country. According to the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business reports, the country has moved from being 169th in the rankings to 147th in that short period of time. Now, the budget minister in the West African state, Abdurrahman Sisse, says a lot more developments are in the pipeline due to the country's reform plan.
We do have a story to present. Things have changed. We did go through 10 years of crisis, but since 2011, the government under the President Ouattara is doing reforms in order to attract FDI into the country and also attract African investors and the public and the private sector into the country. So things are changing. We're doing a lot of things. If you look, for example, on the incentives that we gave in order to attract people, we created a new investment code in 2012. That investment code, for example, gave exemption of VAT when you come to invest into the country, above a certain level of investment. If you look at the year 2014, we gave to the private sector a total of $750 million of incentives in order to attract investment into the country.
Right, then a quick run through the markets here for you. Some fairly interesting developments, shall we say, across the board. The continued smacking of all these markets, of these main indices that we do track, except for Nairobi. That, of course, is a reversal of what we've seen in the last couple of trading sessions. Foreign traders, rather, still booking gains. Some interesting news, however, coming out from the Fed. This is being reported by FT right about now. The Fed has dropped the pledge to be patient, quote unquote, on rate rises, effectively opening up the doors for a rate hike sometime later on in the course of the year. We'll have more details on that story as it develops. Coming up next, we'll be looking at Abuja's changing status from just Nigeria's administrative capital to a place where deals are cut. And the man who put together the hugely successful Egyptian investment conference in just 3 months will be on next.
Effects of the austerity measures are evident and were expected. Egyptians, however, seem to be patient about it. But El-Sisi told government he wants to control the prices promptly before people's patience runs out.
"15 minutes into the hour, you're still watching Global Business Africa. Thank you for watching. Let's take you to Abuja. It was established as the administrative capital of Nigeria in 1975. It's a partial solution to the congestion problem that many an African country faces today. Even though Lagos still is Nigeria's commercial capital, over the years, Abuja is getting a slice of the action as well.
Abuja, the federal administrative capital of Nigeria. It was set up as a city of civil servants and administrators. But increasingly, Abuja has acquired a new status not foreseen before by its plans. The city is now the center of cutting important commercial deals, contracts and projects by CEOs flying in from other Nigerian cities.
We have a commercial capital where businesses really thrive, which is Lagos. So you have more civil servants, you have more contractors, you have people just coming into Abuja to cut deals and live with the government officials.
However, Abuja was never planned as a commercial city, and this role was apparently never foreseen by its planners.
We need to also then begin to think in terms of, in the next 10 years, what will this city be like? In my view, it's planned almost like Lagos. The people who planned Abuja didn't have a futuristic view of the towns.
City authorities are now thinking beyond its original role as an administrative capital to that of a federal commercial center for Nigeria. But this will require going back to the drawing board to fix the limited infrastructure in order to recreate this newfound status.
Now there's a thinking about to connect you to the rail system, to also create an industrial area. Maybe when that comes upstream, that will help to launch it into that dream.
Analysts think it's time foreign direct investments and startups were attracted to set up shop in Abuja.
If you continue to have a civil service environment, it's not going to get to that potential. So it's to begin to think how truly you revitalize and attract more foreign direct investments, not just portfolio investments, but real investments that can help build industries, suck up more people into work, see how you create jobs, and then reduce unemployment. That way, Abuja can begin to live up to that billing.
That could still be a dream for now. But unlike the commercial capital Lagos, Abuja is still relatively free from the congestion and gridlock that prompted the move away from Lagos in the 1970s. A key advantage that could provide the room for an ambitious plan to restructure the city into this new role of a commercial city. Sophia Dengo, CCTV, Abuja, Nigeria.
Now, given all the political and economic turmoil that has characterized Egypt for the last 3 years, how can you put together an investment conference to lure investors back into the North African state and convince them that it's a safe place to put their money in? That challenge fell to Richard Attias, the founder of Richard Attias and Associates, the public relations company that organized the investments conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. He spoke to CCTV's Yasser Hakim.
Mr. Richard, when did you start work on this project of making this conference, and what were the challenges that met you before making it happen?
Frankly speaking, it is one of the big challenges that we never had, because we really started only 4 months ago. So in less than 120 days, we had to design a concept, we had to develop a program in partnership with the local authorities in Egypt. We had to contact many potential speakers and investors. with, of course, the support not only of the government, but many other players like the Banque Lazare, which is an investment bank. I started to think about this conference was, wow, I don't think a lot of people will come in Egypt, I have to confess, because of the security climate environment. And I was wrong. And I'm happy that I was wrong, because from one side, my heart was telling me, Richard, you should go full speed, because the world needs a strong Egypt. The challenge was to deliver a message, to convince people that we were trying to put together the first stone of the new Egypt. And at the end of the day, you know, investment in any country is based on trust and confidence on the country, trust and confidence of the people, and trust and confidence of the leadership. So it was not obvious that this will be achieved. And I have to say today at the end of the conference that what was delivered is beyond expectation.
What was the target of your company and the government of Egypt from this conference?
The first target was to definitely convince and bring foreign investors, global CEOs, and also to have, in addition of few political leaders, all these international financial institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, because today to develop an economy and to create growth, you need all these constituents to be with you. Private sector, public sector, international organization and institution. And this is not an easy exercise when you have only 3 months to do that, because all these people are usually very busy. Today, really, I'm speechless when I look at the facts. In 90 days, all the big international institutions came at the highest level, from Christine Lagarde, IMF, from the top management of World Bank and also of EBRD, and so far and so on. But more importantly, global CEOs. If you were telling me 3 months ago, 4 months ago, even if we fighted hard to try to convince them, that the CEO of General Electric, the CEO of Siemens, the CEO of British Petroleum, the CEO of British Gas, the new CEO of the Chinese Sovereign Fund, CIC, will be with us, I would say, no, you are dreaming. And they came. And they spent 3 days together in Sharm el-Sheikh.
Mr. Richard Atias, thank you very much for joining us.
Quick run through commodity prices here for you. An update with respect to crude oil, especially Brent crude futures. 53.58 was the number before we came in, but in the wake of the release of that news from the U.S. Federal Reserve, essentially dropping the word patient from their statements, Brent crude has actually gone up by quite a bit. It's up 80 cents to 54.31 a barrel apparently here. Session peak of about 54.93 a little earlier on in the bulletin, earlier on in the day. Two Congolese sisters are defying the odds to thrive in a male-dominated electrical and automotive engineering field. We're coming up on that shortly. Welcome back. Now let's paint a scenario here. Two Congolese sisters are essentially walk into any particular garage in pretty much any part of the world. And more often than not, you'll find a lot of guys in greasy overalls, bent over a car or under a car, taking apart an engine in order to fix it. But the situation is slightly different. At a small garage in the city of Pointe-Noire in Congo, two sisters over there have decided to defy the odds and venture into that particular sector, automotive and electrical engineering, which so far has been mostly dominated by men.
Meet Seraphine Telani and Sephora Morko, two sisters who chose to go past stereotypes and pursue a career in auto-electrical engineering. 25-year-old Seraphine has always had a knack for male jobs since childhood, even when her parents presented her with numerous options that were right up her alley. People would say it's a bad profession, but since I was a child, I've always considered that boys' jobs are good for me. That's why I've turned to this kind of profession. At the time, my parents had other ideas for me, like sewing or hairdressing. I rejected that. With what I'm doing now, I feel okay. I can buy food and drinks, no problem. And I learned my job, so I'm quite proud of it. Even my family is now proud of me. Seraphine, the elder of the sisters, has worked on car engines for 5 years after completing 3 years of college education. 21-year-old Sephora, who recently finished her secondary education, has a 2-year experience under her belt and has no regret choosing the career path, as it always puts a meal on her table.
I am doing this job because this is my choice. Of course, I had several possibilities, but I chose automotive electricity. And my present job allows me to earn money and take care of my household.
The sisters understand the gravity of the economic situation in the country and are dedicated to working diligently on their garage duties, a quality that their manager Anel Mavungu knows all too well.
I never had any problem with those girls. They work very well. They are very proactive in their job. Each morning at 7:30, they are there to open the workshop. It's one of their responsibilities.
Despite the common assumption that men prosper more in auto-electrical engineering, the ladies are filled with undeterred focus as they set to prove critics wrong. Seraphine's future ambition is to have her own garage someday, while Sephora aims at mastering her craft, which will enable her be financially independent. Penina Karibe, CCTV.
Let's wrap up with a look at the F015. Get used to that particular word. It's going to be familiar to you in the future. It's a concept car from Mercedes. It showcases the company's thoughts on what sort of cars you will be driving or be driven in autonomously 5 to 10 years from now. This futuristic-looking vehicle has touchscreens inside on the door cards, which can be used for augmented reality, as well as front seats that can spin around 180 or 360 degrees so that passengers in the front can face those guys in the back. Now, Mercedes engineers say autonomous cars like the F015 will allow passengers to work, rest, play and socialize without worrying about what's happening on the road.
We thought that autonomous driving will give us a completely new possibility of redesigning and restructuring of the architecture of today's car. If you hand over actually the steering wheel to this technology, you're free to share time with the family members being in your car, to play or to work.
If you really want to get a fairly good idea of how that autonomous tech works, keep a close eye on Audi's concepts. Got some fairly interesting developments on that. Now, Forex matters. All these numbers are relatively current as of right now. But the one to watch is what will happen tomorrow when the markets do open and currency trading starts again, especially seeing what's come out of the Fed in this particular hour. We certainly can't wait to see that happening, and we'll bring you up to speed with the latest developments on currencies right here in tomorrow's edition of the program. But that's it for this edition of Global Business. We'd like your feedback on what we do around here. globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com is the email to use, and of course when we're not on air, Facebook and Twitter are your ports of call. I'm Ramanyang. Have a profitable 23 hours. We'll see you tomorrow.